welcome to this panel event. My name is Rachel Payne. I am a principal lecturer at Oxford Brookes, and I'm also the immediate past president of NSEAD. I'm delighted to welcome you all to Our Lives, Our Futures, Art and Dialogue about what matters to children and young people. This is a series of events that are hosted by Children and Young People Network at Oxford Brookes University, which comprises academics working across the university who share a common aspiration. This is to contribute to research and knowledge building that will ultimately lead to improving children's and young people's opportunities, experiences, and outcomes. Our Lives, Our Futures encompasses 10 days of online events which provide a platform for children's and young people's art and bring together young people, educators, researchers, cultural experts and organisations to consider some of the most pressing issues for children and young people today. An online exhibition of art has been created by children and young people in Oxfordshire, which accompanies an exciting programme of talks and interactive panel discussions about the things that young people feel strongly about and the creative ways that they can engage with art and make sense of the world. Please visit our exhibition, which was curated by third-year Oxford Brookes Fine Arts students, and also sign up for further Our Lives, Our Future events by visiting our website. So today, the panel discussion today is really exciting, and I'm really honoured to chair our discussion. It is a co-curation between Oxford Brookes University and NSEAD, which, for those of you who don't know, is the National Society for Education in Art and Design. And without much ado, I'm going to hand over to Michelle Gregson, who is our General Secretary for NSEAD.
Thanks, Rachel, and hi, everyone. Lovely to be here. NSEAD is, of course, directly concerned with ensuring that art, craft and design education is understood to be an essential element of civic society. So we spend most of our time working with adult educators to support them in the work that they do. But we never lose sight of the children and young people who we're all working for, whatever our roles. And it's a particular joy to be part of this event and working with some wonderful children and young people as part of this programme. Why do we do this work? Well, it's because we believe that a quality art, craft and design education is an entitlement for all children and young people. And because we know that art matters. And as we're going to see, so do the children and young people who've been involved in Our Lives, Our Future, and there's some wonderful, wonderful things to see and hear this evening. So our panel is going to address the overarching question, why does art matter in the lives of children and young people, stimulated by children's responses to that same question. I want to give thanks to Aisha Delanarol, who is the founder and lead of the Conversation Agency, which is a small agency specialising in philosophical inquiry for the arts, education and cultural sector. Also to Claudia Panetti, art teacher at Oxford High School, and to the Year 2 children from Oxford High. The children participated in 2 workshops with Aisha, and you're going to see a little bit of that this evening, and they explored our key question, why does art matter to them? The conversations were audio recorded and quotes and questions were extrapolated from the recordings. So these are going to be discussed with the panel today.
Lovely, thank you, Michelle. So without much ado, I would like to introduce our incredible expert panel, which I'm very excited to introduce to you now. I'm going to do that in alphabetical order. So I'm going to start with Uli Beattie. Uli is the founder director of At the Bus, an Oxford and London-based charity delivering art as therapy to children with complex needs via the Beattie method, from a specially refurbished double-decker bus. Arriving as a child, a refugee from Hungary in 1956, Uli trained as a teacher and spent 40 years working as a therapeutic educator in mainstream and specialist schools and hospitals before setting up the national charity, The Art Room. Uli was awarded an honorary doctorate from Valspar University in 2015 for her outstanding contribution to the arts, and an OBE in 2016 in recognition of her contribution to the welfare and education of young people. She believes all young people should have access to art. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Sam Cairns. Sam has worked in the cultural sector for 20 years, starting in museum education and then working in libraries, archives and the arts. She has run the Cultural Learning Alliance since 2011 and led the development of the Cultural Learning Alliance's key research findings, The Case for Cultural Learning. Sam project managed and compiled Space for Learning, a new handbook for creating inspirational learning spaces, and Space for Learning COVID guidance. Sam was project director for phase 1 of the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation inquiry into the civic role of arts organisations and project manager of RSA Learning About Culture for the year in 2019. She's a member of the Artsmark Assessment Panel, a Heritage Fund mentor and a primary school governor. The Cultural Learning Alliance champions a right to arts and culture for every child. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Liz McFarlane. Liz is currently NSEAD's president and a freelance art and design education consultant, working with primary and secondary schools and academies across the country to provide support and bespoke CPD. She's a member of the Expert Subject Advisory Panel for Ofqual. Liz has inspected for Ofsted and holds the professional qualification for school inspectors. She's also co-author of the Cambridge International AS and A-Level Art and Design Students book. Prior to this, she taught in secondary schools in Leicestershire and was the National Coordinator for Visual Arts and Media with Specialist Schools and Academies Trust. Next, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Yanina Ramirez. Yanina is a cultural historian, broadcaster and author based at the University of Oxford with a passion for communicating ideas about the past. Yanina's research began with a degree in English literature at Oxford, followed by an MA and PhD at the Centre for Medieval Studies in York on the art, literature and culture of Anglo-Saxon England. But her interests have consistently branched outwards in all directions as she's taught more broadly on everything from classical architecture to the work of Tracey Emin. Broadcasting has allowed Yanina to see narrative threads stretching across time and disciplines and to find shared human concerns, themes, problems, and innovations throughout time. There's one word that has appeared in every school and university report that Yanina has ever had, and that is enthusiastic. And she really wants to share that enthusiasm. And she does that for art and design education as one of the patrons for NSEAD. Yanina has another engagement and will only be with us until 5 o'clock, but we're absolutely delighted that she's managed to find time to be with us until then. And finally, last but not least, I would like to introduce you to Vicky Shotbolt. Vicky is the founder and CEO of Parent Zone, an organisation that sits at the heart of digital family life. She has worked in parenting for over 20 years, establishing Parent Zone in 2004 to support parents with their digital parenting. She sits on the executive board of the UK Council for Internet Safety and is the co-chair of the Digital Resilience Working Group. Vicky co-hosts Tech Shock, a podcast that looks at the impact of digital technologies on family life and unpicks the issues for parents, teachers, professionals, and policymakers. Thank you all for participating in today's discussion. I know that you're going to provide really exciting and thoughtful responses to the children's provocations. So we have summarised key themes, as Michelle said, that emerged from the Year 2 workshops, and we've included those on the PowerPoint slides that you will be able to see today. So these will include a quote from a child that exemplifies our focus and a question that we want to put to the panel. And these will be threaded throughout the discussion. And as I said earlier, if you have questions or comments about particular themes, then we will open up, once the panel have had an opportunity to respond, we'll open those questions up to everybody here today. So I'm going to start off with quite a big overarching theme, that of art as a vehicle for understanding other disciplines and questioning the world. So we heard from lots of children, how lots of children talked about the importance of art beyond the classroom. As you can see exemplified in this child's quote, I think art is important because it can expand your imagination. So the question I'd like to put to the panel is, how does art facilitate understanding of the world and the child's place in it? And I'm going to start that off by opening that up to Janina.
Thank you, Rachel. What a wonderful introduction, and such an honour to be alongside so many people working so hard to bring the arts back into education. This is a wonderful question. I love the child's response. I think art is important because it can expand your imagination. The key for me about how art and the subject that I'm passionate about, art history, intersects with other disciplines is that it is the one, like music, where hands and mind and all the senses coordinate in creating an expression of the imagination. And what I also love, as being part of the humanities as opposed to the sciences, it's not always about the physical thing you see in front of you. That can be an inspiration, but the imagination is endless. It can create anything. And how do we express that? We can do it through literature, but through writing, we're restricted by the words we've been taught, by the vocabulary we've been given. We can do it through music, but that takes training, that takes mastering the theory, it takes mastering the instrument. With art, it's the purest expression of the connection between the hand and the mind and the heart, and that idea that we can relay the things our mind creates. And this is something that has been done by human beings since the dawn of time. I've had the privilege in my broadcasting career of working on objects like the Lion Man, this 15,000-year-old artwork that was carved out of a mammoth's tusk, and it is half a human body and half an animal's body. Now, what this shows us is, even back tens of thousands of years, human beings knew there was a limit to what was physical, what was real, and what their imagination could do. And art was the vehicle that they crossed that divide through. And I saw an artist trying to use flint tools to recreate that object. And it was this wonderful tactile expression of the imagination. So I would say that for children in particular, when they are still learning to manipulate language, to really express their feelings, their thoughts through words, surely making art is the easiest way to access those, and the most expressive and the most creative. So it can unlock everything. It can unlock all the imaginations, but also the fears, the hopes, the anxieties of children. And now it's treated as this sort of optional topic. Oh, we've got a bit of free time, let's get the crayons out and do some drawing. But in fact, it feeds into everything, and every decent polymath of the last however many thousands of years understood that art was an integral part of working out our relationship with the universe. So I could tell you about Leonardo da Vinci. I can also tell you about this amazing woman who existed 400 years before Leonardo da Vinci, called Hildegard of Bingen, who used all these things, music, science, astrology, the natural world, and the creative arts to express the inexpressible. But that's for another day.
Oh, that's a shame. That was wonderful, Janina. Thank you so much. I love the points that you're making about the how art can be the immediacy of, it can express the immediacy of the human experience and the expression of the imagination. That's wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to open this up to the panel. Is there anybody who would like to respond, or who has an additional thought that they'd like to? Oh yes, Sam. Lovely. Thank you.
I, as someone who crafted the Cultural Learning Alliance's key research findings, you might find I went to the evidence when I was thinking about this. And this point about the sort of connectedness of art, which everything you said is completely true. I feel like I might bring the conversation down a bit by talking about cultural capital, because obviously that's part of the Ofsted framework, which I'm assuming some colleagues on this call have to work within and think about. And actually something that struck me about facilitating understanding the world is the research on cultural capital. If you go back to Bourdieu's research, so one of the things that he was saying was that he felt that by developing cultural capital, and obviously the study of art, of going to art galleries, of seeing things, of thinking about art, he felt that privileged children in families where that was happening, because it helped develop their ability to think in abstract, formal ways. And he felt that then privileged them within our education system, because that's things that our current education system often values, not within art necessarily, but across the whole thing. And so I think there's something quite interesting actually about, by developing our understanding of art and all the really positive things you get from that, it's also potentially helping you within our formal education system as a child. I mean, there's a whole load of other discussions about existing systems and how inclusive they are and whether we want to perpetuate them, which I'm beginning to wonder about around cultural capital. But that was my immediate thought on just actually it helps children potentially understand the world in a way that helps them within education.
That's a really interesting response, Sam. Thank you. Yeah, it is. I would agree with that very wholeheartedly, actually, about privileging certain children over others within our society. I'd like to now go to Vicky. Hi, Vicky. Oh, you're on mute.
Rachel's on mute.
Vicky, you're still on mute. I cannot. Are you?
Oh, there we go.
Hey, there we are. Lovely.
I'm sorry, my sound has been really unkind to me today. But I hope you can hear me okay. And first and foremost, can I say what a privilege and how intimidating it is to be with so many people who are experts in art. That is not my particular expertise, and yet art is such an important part of what we do. And I wanted to kind of contribute to this one, particularly because I think about the work that we do trying to help children understand digital spaces that are almost by definition invisible and complex and difficult to explain, not just to children, but to adults. And so often the language that we end up using is the language of art. We ask children to draw what they understand of the digital world and to imagine what that might look like. And who knows, their depictions of it could be entirely accurate because nobody actually knows what the internet looks like. And so for us as an organization, I think the thread that runs through when we're stuck and we want to explain a complex idea to a child, it is always art that we turn to. So it's really that interplay between physical art and the opaqueness of the digital world is extraordinarily powerful and really important to us.
Thank you, Vicky. That's really thought-provoking, and it also makes me think of, you know, the sort of a visual language and how a lot of the digital is rooted in understanding the visual. And I agree with what you're saying there about it being a very much an invisible or a difficult space to negotiate. That was very thought-provoking. Thank you. Let's move on to Yuli.
Hi, thank you very much. Well, first of all, I want to say it's fantastic hearing what everybody is saying and how we can all contribute to this conversation. I have to say, from our point of view, art is international. You don't have to be an expert to do art. Every single person can engage. And when you watch a child who has no language, a child who's traumatized, a child who's recently arrived to the country, or who has no language, if you watch them, they all become artists. And I'm always wondering, and I think this is something which I'd love to open to a further conversation, where does this stop, where a child stops with the utter confidence when they're drawing and scribbling and creating at a nursery school, and they'll draw a squiggle and they'll say, this is my mum, with complete confidence, and how quickly young people lose that. What are we doing in the art world where we're blocking that? And when Nina said, you know, there's a bit of spare time, let's do some art. Surely we should be bringing art back, and that should be a way where we can communicate. We can teach every single subject through art. It shouldn't just be a curriculum that stands on its own. So I just want to say, I think we're all experts in art. I think somewhere we've lost that confidence, and it's an international language. It's a human right. People have been doing it forever. And I've been in situations where people are saying, these young people can't communicate. You give them a piece of paper and a pencil, they are communicating. And then it's just for us to be able to interpret that. So I just want to say how it's an important subject, and we shouldn't just make it a subject standing on its own.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Yuli. Let's move on to Liz.
Hi, yes, I agree totally, Yuli. I was just thinking there about the power that art can have just to be a focus for question. Having been in galleries with children standing in front of artworks who then ask all those questions about what's going on and reading into paintings and pieces of artwork and artifacts. And I think that's hugely, hugely important, that it offers that opportunity for conversation as well as physically making art. I can remember a time taking some year fives to the Tate, where they started a really, really interesting discussion about what art is, because they were looking at Tracey Emin's Unmade Bed. And one of the boys say, does that make my brother an artist? Because his bedroom looks quite like that. I couldn't have empty alcohol bottles in it, but yeah, it sort of started a whole conversation, class conversation about what constitutes art and how everybody can perhaps be perceived as an art, and when does it become an unmade, a messy bedroom that your mum tells you off about, to when it becomes a piece of artwork that then appears in a gallery. So I think that's really just as powerful as physically making art, being able to converse about it. And that's a whole other dialogue about how we prepare children to do that, to make the most of it.
Thank you, Liz. Yeah, indeed, the kind of whole experiential element of not just making, but viewing, experiencing. Yeah, lovely. I think we'll take one last question on this particular topic from Janina. And if there's anybody who has any questions for the panel at this point in relation to this element that we're discussing, please do pop them in the chat now, and we can come to them after Janina has had an opportunity to respond.
Thank you. Yeah, wonderful responses. I have something that's been triggered by every one of the things you've said. So, Sam, when you were talking about access, I think this is one of the things that we really need to work on, that the art world has been turned into an elite establishment, a money-making establishment, but art, artifacts, objects, materiality, crafts, these things are not elitist. And you know, the way we teach about these things in schools, we should be differentiating between those things. And I think art history helps in that, because, you know, these things as cultural tools, you know, Yuli, your expression there about language, this was going back to what I was saying at the beginning. When you speak and when you communicate with another person, be it through writing, be it through speaking, you're still having to learn a language. What happens when you go to another country and you can't communicate? Art is that connection point. And then I think it was I can't remember. Oh, Vicky, you were saying about the digital world. Well, this is where I think it's the most important skill we can be teaching our children going forward. Let's think back to when we were young. My access to imagery was limited. I could pick up a postcard at a gallery. I could photocopy a book and it would come out all grainy. That has changed so radically in our lifetime with the development of digital media and the internet. Images are actually what are leading us almost every day now in a way that they never did. We used to be a text-based learning environment. Now we are so rich with images, but are we as well trained to read an image as we are to read words? I do an exercise with my children where I get them to read a scam email telling me I've got £8 million in a bank account and I just need to send my details over, when they were asking me about why they had to learn about grammar. And I said, note the grammatical errors, note the reading aspects of this that don't feel right. Well, we're moving into a world where we're using our eyes to sweep over news articles. We're picking out things spontaneously through the visual, but we're not questioning it and scrutinizing it in the same way. How do we know if they're fake images? How do we know if they've been manipulated? We need to be so much more visually literate than we ever have been. And that's something that we have to adapt to, but also embrace. The world of creativity for our children is so much broader now. It's not just, do they have access to pens and paint and canvases? They can create on a tablet, on a phone. And embracing this new digital way of doing art is another way of getting children to express themselves, I think.
That's lovely. Thank you, Nina. I don't think we've had any questions in the chat come through, which is fine. We can move on to our next question, which I think some of the responses to the last question, you already began to address this issue of communication. So art as a form of communication, as a way of making meanings, a way of understanding other meanings and messages, but also creating and communicating them too. So we heard how children recognize the importance of art as a means to communicate all sorts of things. So their experiences, their preferences, their imagination, their thinking, their curiosity about the world. And as we can see from this child's quote, I think this is lovely. So I think everyone is an artist because they can all do drawings. That's very much a message that has come through in the conversation already. Even if they're too young to like write words, they can still scribble. Like you can still see them drawing in some way. So I think everyone is an artist. How wonderful is that? So I would like to open this up to the panel, and please feel free to put your hand up. I'm not necessarily going to call on anybody specifically. Can you tell us a little bit about the relationship between art and communication for children and young people? And we have Liz putting her hand up first. Lovely. Over to you, Liz.
Hi, I don't think this is something we do particularly well in schools. I think we quickly forget how valuable drawing is as a form of communication. In the early years, it's really important. Before children can write, they're drawing, they're making marks, they're playing in the sand, they're making marks all over the place. As soon as we start to introduce that concept of reading and writing, the value of drawing goes right out of the window. We don't really explain the range and the purpose of drawing, but it's used right across the curriculum. It supports lots of subjects in different forms, all of which are hugely valuable. And instead of teaching children about the different types of drawing and the range of possibility of drawing, it's lost quite early on, and the importance is put straight back onto writing. And I think that's a real shame and a real missed opportunity, because as we've said before, it can open up opportunities to explain ideas in different ways. That polymath idea of actually hugely important to communicate different ideas in different forms. So I worry that actually the British education system really does a disservice and expects, writing is the first and foremost form of communication, but it's not the first form of communication. It's so important that we should be teaching drawing for far longer and really from the start, or it happens all the time.
But I think that's a fascinating point, Liz. Do you think that there's something there about teachers' lack of confidence about knowing how art can be a form of communication? Absolutely.
Particularly for primary teachers, many haven't studied art beyond the compulsory Key Stage 3 curriculum, so they have little to draw on themselves. And they're put under pressure from the need to meet targets for reading and writing, quite simply. So the other things, the play gets pushed aside, and that becomes something that you do at the end of a long day if you've been good. You have the chance to draw then, but not first and foremost where it should be a fundamental form of communicating and helping. Although it does, we know, of course, it helps children to write. If you're drawing, you're actually building your fine motor skills. You're actually preparing to do the next stage. You can't do that unless you really engage with drawing materials and with the artistic side.
Thank you, Liz. Yes, absolutely. You've highlighted a number of considerable issues with our education system. Let's move on to Vicky.
Hi, and I've mastered the mute button this time. I absolutely, this one immediately made me think of a piece of work that we've done with young people where we've been working with them around mental health and trying to scaffold conversations between parents and children around mental health. And we've done a lovely piece of work called Ollie. But children kept saying to us, we don't really have the words, we don't really know how we feel, and we don't really know what advice we want you to give us. So we gave them all pieces of paper and said, could you maybe draw how you feel? And through a drawing, we got a child, and I think it's the most fun I've had in the last year. A child drew me a picture of their tummy with butterflies in it. And that single drawing communicated exactly the feeling that a child of 6 doesn't really have the words to describe. And in fact, it took my content team quite a long time to translate that feeling of butterflies in your tummy into content that we could then pass on to parents to help parents think about the conversations they need to have. So for me, that relationship between feelings and communication, when words can be too blunt to communicate a feeling, and art does that job in the way that little chap did, doing his drawing of butterflies in the tummy. Yeah, for me, this resonates enormously.
That's lovely, Vicky. Thank you. I find that story you've just told really evocative. That's just wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Let's move on to Nina.
I'm back. That was lovely, and it really sums up, I think, so many things about how art can be used in a way to help people express themselves. And I think something that might change in the coming years is, as schools become increasingly aware about the spectrum of needs that different students have, and particularly not just physical, but mental and emotional needs as well, and how they manifest in different types of learning. I think it's going to have to become much more intrinsically rooted into learning pathways right the way through primary and secondary. And Liz was saying some fascinating things there about, as language, as mathematics become the kind of key targets that schools have to hit, that drawing, that creating these visual images goes out the window. But there are so many techniques now that can be used and really should be introduced across primary and secondary, whereby facts, information, records, data are recorded pictorially. They are recorded in the margins. I work with teachers who are encouraging their students, when they've learned a fact or they've learned a new word, draw a picture of it. What does it look like in your head? Put it in the margin. And those visual aids can be fantastic for revision, for entrenching that knowledge. So it's about introducing these skills. But if I could just respond to the question a little bit as well, where it says, can you tell us a little bit more about the relationship between arts and communication? I think what is so interesting and will have to be adapted to in education is that children are incredibly visually literate today in a way that they never have been. So babies can navigate icons on an iPhone because they recognize an emoji, they recognize the sign of a telephone, they know what it means. And that relationship between the sign and the concept, it is something that children are encouraged to do in nursery and in the very early years. But why not encourage that sort of connective pictorial representation right the way through? Because it will only end up serving them better in the digital world of the future that they're going to be getting older in. So it's preparing them for a better future as well. It's essential that the arts are prioritized more than they have been.
Lovely, thanks. Thank you, Nina. I think there is a question coming up about emotional needs and well-being, and especially after the 18 months that we've had.
Yeah.
The importance of the arts in supporting children to express the experiences that they've had in a safe way, or in a way that works for them, I think is really important. That's great, thank you. Let's move on to Sam.
So I had originally, because I imagine all the participants know this, we had these questions in advance so we could prepare. I'd originally, when I was thinking about this, was thinking about there's a really wide range of different evidence studies that show different form of arts help improve different types of communication. But actually listening to everyone speak, it makes me think more about the fact that, I mean, art is a form of communication, because we're talking about visual literacy, and actually, Nina's already said this about the importance of visual literacy, and actually children actually need training on visual literacy in a way they didn't before. So actually art and its role in developing their ability to read the world and keep themselves safe in many ways is incredibly important, as part of their education. But so, yeah, I just think that visual literacy and actually not making sure that people understand art is communication. I mean, it does a lot of other things, but actually parents need to understand its central importance there.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to jump in, but it's going back to your first point, Sam, as well, about breaking down this conception of what art is, that it's, middle-class families taking their kids to the Tate at the weekend. It's not that. It's so much more than that. And our museums and galleries do so much to put that across, but it's got to come right the way down. It's got to really filter down that art has become this relatively exclusionary term, and once they go to school, if they want to study art, then they've got to choose it as a GCSE, and oh look, they're the art students over there. It's got to be so much more entrenched and cross-disciplinary, and it's kind of going back to that idea of the polymath again, that the polymath would use all the skills at their disposal, but I think it does bring us back to kind of how do we make art accessible. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's absolutely.
Well, I think that's incredibly true, because actually when you do study, anthropology, when they're looking at what families are doing in museums and art, that actually when you say, did you do art or did you go to a gallery, they go, oh no. And then when you actually question them, they are doing lots of things, they just don't call it. So it's almost a language barrier, which is, I think, really interesting for what we call things, because art is, people know what we mean by art, but it's such a small term, and it's that thing that how do we widen that out so actually when we say art, they understand the full breadth of what that means and its role in the human experience.
Thank you, Sam. I have had a couple of questions come through from the audience for the panel, one of which kind of links very nicely to what has just been discussed. So the question, I'll read it out. With art galleries as part of cultural capital seen as something the privileged experience, why is art as a GCSE still seen as less skillful or of a lower level to core subjects? It's sometimes seen as somewhere to put difficult kids, and in my experience, they flourish. How do we turn the conversation around so our subject is seen as building skills rather than as an easy option? Anybody like to respond? Yeah, Nina. Yeah,
because
lovely.
Sadly I have to go in a minute, and
yeah.
I'm finding this so fascinating, and I wish I could stay for the whole hour, because this is critical stuff we're discussing. And I think this also comes down to the composition of our education system, that we divide our disciplines physically and intellectually. A student will leave a classroom where they've been doing biology and walk down the corridor and do art, and then never the twain shall meet. But the relationships between all the disciplines, this interdisciplinary collaboration, could be so enriched in our schools. It could be so usefully encouraged with art at the center, because every discipline has a form of visual expression. Every history, physics, they all can express themselves through visual representation, and art should be in the mix with all of those. And I think that this person's question is bang on. It's this definition of the three letters ART. What does it mean, and what does it conjure up in people's minds? And how can we recondition that? How can we not just see it as a soft subject, a subject that for the kids that are maybe better with their hands than with their brains? Nonsense. It really does need to be a ground up transformation in how secondary schools and primary schools structure their education. But my lasting memory of doing science at school was diagrams, drawing diagrams, working with pens, pencils, using my hands. And surely, if you just say to a child, you're doing art right now. It's not just Van Gogh and splashing things on a canvas. You're artistically expressing yourself right the way through. And, you know, maybe don't stop kids doodling at the back of the classroom. That's just a personal observation.
I really liked your suggestion earlier to use doodling as a form of revision.
Mimetic, exactly. Things I sat on a wonderful lecture where a scientist was saying how he gets complex terms, breaks them down into mini syllables, and then gets the students to draw their version of what they think that word would look like. And they draw the most wonderful, weird things, but then they never forget that word. They remember that complex scientific term through these symbols that they put together themselves. So
I think that's fascinating. That's a whole nother conversation, though, isn't it?
It is. And while I have the floor, I must disappear. And I just want to thank you all so much. And I'll tune into the rest of the discussion. But thank you all for giving me this opportunity to take part.
Thank you so much for coming along. We really appreciate your input. It's been fantastic. Let's move to Sam.
That question about value, I mean, is incredibly knotty and something we're constantly struggling with when we're talking to Art for Education and others. I mean, I wonder if there's several different things that need to happen. So something is about, because I think people assign value to subjects when they think they help children's outcomes, and often that's linked to money and employability. So actually understanding how valuable art is in your communication skills and your employability as an adult, and helping parents to know that. Because there was something I was reading, which the phrasing isn't quite how I would put it, but they were saying it's something about sort of like magic secret middle class knowledge about the value of these subjects, and it almost is, because, like, you know, so parents from more privileged backgrounds are saying choose things that you enjoy, and the things that enjoy are actually helping motivate children to go to school. And then I think if you look at the value you get from studying different forms of arts, there's this uplift in outcomes. And actually, if only some children are getting that uplift because they're being told you can't do this isn't useful, you know, that's incredibly damaging for our society as a whole and people reaching their potential. I have to say that thing about children who are I mentioned I'm an arts mark assessor. It always gets my goat a bit when people talk in arts mark assessments about how they want to make sure that every child has the opportunity to shine. So the children that don't do so well, they can shine in the arts. And I'm like that's not how it works. It's, you know, it's about valuing everyone and actually saying, you know, anyway. So that if you're doing an arts mark assessment and you happen to get me as your assessor, that won't help you saying that. And the other thing I just think, though, that perhaps one of the things is it's almost the ability to take part in art. The threshold is very low, if you like. So actually, in a way that perhaps music is more difficult just to start and do, and it's why teachers often don't like teaching music as much as they do, say, art at primary level. And we might be coming on to teachers, I think, but actually, and teacher skills specialisms, that maybe it's because everyone can do art that people think it isn't difficult. And therefore they don't see the value in the sort of the endless refining and trying to be the very best version of yourself that you become when you're trying to create art, and just that almost obsession really great artists have about trying to perfect things.
Thank you, Sam. And we'll come on a bit later to a question about struggle and art. And I think there is a misconception that art is in school, that art is easy, that if everyone can do it, therefore, you know, it is an easy thing to do. But actually, as we all know, it's actually a really difficult thing to do. Let's go to Liz.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, having been an examiner for art and design, it's really a hard subject to achieve well in and attain well in. The level of skill that's needed is really high. So where this concept that it's soft, it's just beyond me, really. When you talk to children about how they find comparative GCSE experience of the course, 9 out of 10 will say that art and design is one of the hardest things that they do. Even if they love it, it's still hard because you have to be on point all the time. Everything that you do is going to be potentially examined. You have to be prepared to face failure when things don't work out. You have to have lots of time to dedicate to your art if you really want to master what you're doing and do really well and develop your skills. And actually, as one very bright young woman told me when she was predicted to get top grades for absolutely everything, it was quite easy to sit down and write an essay because you could do it in an hour and a half and then you were finished and you were done. But your art was going to take you weeks and weeks and weeks, and even then it might not work. It might not be exactly as you had envisaged it, and you might have to start over. So she didn't think it was an easy, soft option. She thought it was one of the hardest things she was doing. So yeah, I think that's
thank you, Liz.
tells them what they think.
Is it more accurate to say that it's the education profession who see it as a soft option, and actually those who study it recognize how difficult it can
challenge
be.
Anybody that doesn't understand it to try doing it?
Yes. There's a challenge. Okay, are we ready to move on? Yuli, you had your hand up, but are you happy to move?
Let's move on. No, because everyone has said it. So let's
okay,
move on.
fantastic. That's great. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next question, which is about art as a space for respecting and accepting difference. And we came across this both in terms of the child's experience, so what the child was saying about how important it was for them to experience and engage with difference. But also when we were reading the transcripts from the children's workshops, we also thought how important it is for the teacher to be in a position where they are acknowledging and respecting difference, and how art can encourage those conversations and open up those spaces. The quote that we had from the child was, most people have different opinions and some people won't like it and other people will love it. And they were talking about a piece of art. So, everybody has a different opinion when they engage with a piece of art, and that's okay, that's fine, that's good. So the question I'd like to put to the panel is, how does art support children's understanding of and respect for difference? And we'll go to Yuli first.
Okay, thanks very much. I was thinking about this question, and I'm interested in the child's comment. I mean, from my point of view, art is everywhere. So the moment a child is born, we pick them up and they're seeing our faces react. We're then reading books to them. As far as I'm concerned, the whole idea of communication and respecting through the world and through the art is the way for us to support and engage with children. And I just wonder if we're separating the whole thing of art, communication, respect, and actually we're doing it the whole time, and we're segregating it. We're doing particular subjects and we're looking at core subject. And really the whole time, every time a child walks into a school, into a room, they're surrounded by art. They might not think it's art. I mean, I can see a radio behind you. That's a piece of art. Someone has designed that. And how can we get a child to look at art without thinking, this is a challenge, I have to replicate that? How can we communicate the differences, the respect between, I might draw a radio that looks like your radio, but somebody might draw a radio that's in their head, or they would like to create it. And I think that's really, really important for us to listen to the children, make them look, give them the respect that they will deserve, and allow them to be creative. I once ran a workshop where I wouldn't let the children talk. Everybody had to draw everything, and everybody had to draw how they felt about each other, about coming into a room. And I can't remember who said who said that lovely quote about the child who drew their stomach with butterflies. I had a child who drew a washing machine, and the washing machine was the child because it was going round. It was in such turmoil. It didn't know where to stop and begin. And it was such a fantastic way of communicating and looking at the differences. But none of us talked. We all drew how we felt and how we wanted to communicate with each other. So I'm just wondering whether, are we separating art too much from life and from education and from reality?
Lovely, thank you, Yuli. That's really thought-provoking, really thought-provoking. Let's move to Vicky.
I absolutely love that. I love the washing machine. That's again one of those.
I love the butterfly.
So what this made me think about was how we, in a world where children are communicating digitally, which is the space that I know best, and you're removing all of those personal clues, what we have to work quite hard at with children is helping them to empathize with how that person might be feeling. And we start using simple things like emojis and text messages just to try and introduce some of that empathy and human interaction in a space that can be very cold and lacking any sense of empathy with the person that you were talking to. And we do that through visual clues. So, you know, I think the more we can raise children's understanding of visual communication, the better, if we want to encourage children to have respect for difference, particularly in online spaces where you do not have the ability to look someone in the eye or hold their hand and see whether or not they're feeling a bit wobbly. We are absolutely reliant on using art and visual clues to help children understand difference and difference of opinions and just difference. So, you know, for me, this is one of the spaces where the way that the world is going, the forward new ways of communication that we're seeing, art's going to become ever more important in digital spaces.
Thank you, Vicky. That's so true. The issues that we experience, the kind of the conflict that is experienced often online, and where people. I read a very interesting piece of research that where somebody has a different name, where they have an avatar or they have a pseudonym online, actually they can be encouraged to have much more open and productive conversations. That was a piece of that was some results for some research I read the other day. But we need to support those spaces. We need to encourage those spaces where those differences are you know, articulated and engaged with in a respectful way. You're right. I absolutely agree with you that it gives an opportunity for children to learn those skills. Sam.
I think all of that's true. It's something that struck me, which is again slightly removed from the question, is I know that older children in particular, so ones I talk to, struggle with art because they don't like the fact they want to know what the right answer is. I don't know if anyone else experiences that. They're uncomfortable with art because of the ambiguity. And actually, I think it's so important that children are in spaces and doing things where they know there isn't one right answer, because it helps them understand that there's not one right answer to lots of things in our lives, and therefore not one right view. And I think that's part of the sort of the developing the understanding of a multiplicity of different viewpoints, and respect for difference, that it's perfectly acceptable that someone likes this and someone likes this, and actually learning how to amicably disagree about things, which I feel like is a skill that increasingly our public discourse lacks, and actually anything that can support people to understand that there isn't always one right answer, and that ambiguity is okay, and we can hold that and be comfortable with that, is really important. And the role of art within schools to help children develop those skills, I think, shouldn't be overlooked.
Do you think, Sam, that just listening to you say to speaking, and also to refer back to Yuli's point earlier, that actually, you know, if children can respect the fact that one person's drawn something in one way and somebody else draws in another, that actually we need to be asking the teachers to respect those differences in children's artwork as well, and not expect children to all come out with the same thing, which quite often happens in the classroom, unfortunately.
I think this might speak to the question about specialist teachers. Actually, so I'm not an art specialist. My background is museums, so it's object-based learning is more what I know the pedagogy of. But there is something about, I feel like often the focus, if you are not an experienced teacher, can be on the product and not the process. And actually, my understanding of high quality artworks is actually the process is just as important as the product. And when and a specialist art teacher understands that, and actually therefore will develop those skills and will understand, therefore it actually the product is only a small part of what you're attempting to teach. So therefore you need to, as a teacher, need to understand you're going to get lots of different outcomes from something, and actually what the outcomes are. I mean, some of them aren't even visible. So and I think specialist teachers know that because they know their subject inside out. But I've got more to say on that. I will wait for that question.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Let's move to Liz.
Yeah, I was thinking of this just in terms of the importance of teachers' subject knowledge to promote respect for difference, particularly with regard to different cultures. Every culture, every group of humans across time in the world has produced art of some description. And, looking at art, exploring art, responding to art from different cultures is hugely, hugely important. But it's very much dependent on the experiences that children have in classrooms, which depends on the teacher's own education about diversity and culture, and their own subject knowledge development, which we need to be looking at. And I know that, I'm going to say, NSEAD has done a lot of work through the anti-racist art and design education group, challenging schools and teachers to think about the curriculum that they're teaching and to increase diversity and equity. And it plays a huge part, but we really do have to work hard to enable teachers to teach it effectively.
Yeah, absolutely, Liz. And it is understanding of respect of differences is also, as well as it being cultural, it's also gender, and it's also it is many different facets of what it means to be a human being. And on one hand, our society seems to be much more open to conversations about these, yet with that comes this polarity of kind of a much more kind of aggressive or negative response to that. So we're kind of constantly dealing with these tensions, aren't we? And art can enable us to embrace and unpack that, which is one of the wonders of our subject, I think. Yes, Yuli.
I love what Liz said. We need to look at and do so much. I think we've got so much to do, and I think through art we could do so much. That I think really we could teach every single subject through this, and looking at how diversity and how we respect each other. I just wanted to bring in artist therapy, because that's obviously my speciality, and how we use art as a way of engaging with the most challenging children. And one of the things we don't do, and I just wonder whether this might be of interest to people or maybe not, but we very rarely use paper to work on. We always use tangible objects. So one of the first things we do is make our portraits on a solid wooden square or circle, and we paint ourselves, and we look around the bus, who looks like what, who's got a different face, and we all have different faces. We discuss how we look and how we feel about themselves. And I just wonder whether that whole thing of using objects to create on is somehow has a much more of a tangible object than a piece of paper. With a piece of paper, it's very easy to fail, because by the time you've drawn on a piece of paper and you've taken it home and you put it in your rucksack and it's got wet and you take it home and people look at it as an object of brilliance or they don't comment on it. And if you take something like a lampshade home or a clock or a wooden chair with artwork, it becomes an understanding of art. And of course, you can bring in cultural differences, different messages. And I just wonder whether there's something in that perhaps we use paper too easily to produce art on, and whether something solid has more of a meaning. I'm throwing that open, actually.
That's a great provocation. Thank you. It definitely opens up the realms of thinking about the relationship between media and equipment, and how we communicate and what we communicate, and how that influences the way we engage with media, influences the way that we are able to communicate different experiences and so on. I had somebody pop something in the chat there, which was just a reminder to us, and quite rightly too, that this conversation of respect for difference also it extends to an anti-ableist agenda, which is also something that NSEAD are currently championing. And absolutely, that was from Lucy. That was a really important point. Thank you for that. Let us move on to the next question. Is something that we have begun to think a little bit about, to touch on, and I guess that's something that's quite interesting here, is that a lot of these different themes interconnect. There's a lot of interconnection between these different questions, and I hope that is coming out in people's responses. This was something that came through very strongly in the children's responses to the workshop, when they were talking about why art was important to them, was the emotional element, how important the relationship between art and experiencing or expressing emotion was. And we were when we were looking through the comments that the children made, we were all really kind of struck by these two quotes. So when I feel angry, I just doodle. Doodling makes me feel calm, and I just calm down. So on one hand, art is really supporting kind of a therapeutic response, and on the other was sometimes when I'm mad, I think that my artwork is not good, so then I think I'm not a good artist. But when I feel good, then I feel like I have good artwork. So that experience of the emotional state influencing our perception and the way that we engage with the things that we create. Our emotional state changes how we think about ourselves almost, and the things that we produce. So my question to the panel is, how does art production support children and young people's experiences of struggle? Okay, over to you, Lee.
Oh, okay, thanks very much. Well, this is my world, really. You know, every child that comes to the bus or to a studio has been referred to us because they have enormous struggles. Many of them find it really difficult to express how they're feeling. They might not have the word, or they might be so angry or so traumatized that they actually can't communicate. So for me, and obviously everybody, we're all talking about the power of art. It's just quite extraordinary how children are able to sit down and they think they're not talking. That's what's interesting, that while they're drawing and while they're painting, they're not only doing the subject that might have been brought into the program, but they actually express how they're feeling. And I think we're constantly surprised at how a child with the most complex needs, who the school is really struggling with, they're waiting to go to CAMS, how through art they're able to engage and talk about their struggles. Again, I don't think it's necessarily through words. Of course, many of them are very happy to talk, but how through art, it almost opens a door. It literally is like opening a door to a space where they feel that they're able to engage, they can talk, they find a safe place. And the process of painting, using art, using paintbrushes, using your fingers, using hand, somehow puts them into a place where they're able to engage in a much, much simpler way than if it was a one-to-one way of communication. So for me, a child who comes with a difficulty, we know what's going on in their life. It's really, really complex. But they're all willing to come. They're willing to come into the studio. We share food with them. We're there to support their challenges. We're not there to solve it. We work with them and we work with other professionals. I think the experience of using art, engaging in art, is really able to open doors for them in a way that I think possibly other subjects can't. So I'm an advocate of this, and I think it works.
I'm interested that you were saying that you share food as well. I had a conversation with somebody yesterday where they said we always have an event. When we get together, we make sure that there is food. There's a ritual about sharing sharing things and having a space where you can share, as well as, you know, through food and drink, as well as through the making activity, and how important that is.
I think the two things really go hand in hand, because actually if you have an anxious child who comes into a studio, you know, breaking bread together, sharing food together actually is already breaking boundaries. Yeah. But also I think it's really important to explain how we can actually discuss other people's challenges. So it's not just about our own, and about differences. And, you know, huge racial situations, you know, go around conversations on who's willing to sit next to who. I can't sit next to you because my father says you're a different religion. And through art, you can really work together. You can talk about different cultures. You can look at different artists. You can talk about different countries. So somehow what we do, and I think what every art studio and good art teachers do, is actually break the boundaries. That yes, we use art as a vehicle, but actually there's so much more that we can do to support the struggles and the challenges.
That's wonderful, how art can support the breaking down of boundaries and open up spaces. That's lovely, thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to come in and comment on this? Yes, Sam.
I think it's more a question than a real, because this isn't what I think is. I'm absolutely clear that producing art does help children and young people process things, and we know art therapy. But actually, what I think we don't know is how it does it, like what's actually going on in the brain, and I don't feel like we fully understand the mechanisms at work. But if people know there is research on that, that would be really interesting, because I think there's a mental health epidemic going through our schools, and actually schools desperately need the tools, I think, to tackle that. And actually, if we could be clear about these are the things and this is why it works, but I'm not sure we know. But I'm interested if people know the studies and the evidence, because there's this sort of like, what are the specific interventions and how are they working? Because generally we seem to see there's a correlation between doing art and improvements in people's mental health. But specifically, if you're a teacher and you want to do it, how, you know, what do you do for different types of things?
I think there was a study between, it was BBC and UCL, where they identified some 3 key reasons why the relationship between mental health and art, or how art production can support the generation of mental health. And I've just had a comment in the chat, and this addresses one of the points. This is from Corinna. She says, art, any form of creativity, really seems to help with the calming down the mind, helping busy thinking to settle a bit. It seems to me that it helps us all to get a bit more present and deal with the here and now. And that was definitely one of the findings from this piece of research, that it helps calm the mind, it helps focus the mind, it helps us alleviate the anxieties that we're experiencing, and to push them aside and to give ourselves a little bit of a breathing space from it. Yuli, I don't know if you want to come back in there, because I'm guessing you've probably got quite a lot of knowledge about this.
No, I'm really sorry. I do. And unfortunately, I don't know the answer to Sam's question. I was on a panel with the Foundling Museum, and somebody did do research to actually see what happens to the brain and the anxiety level when children and adults actually use art. I have to say, I would love, we don't video our children, but to your question, Sam, I would love to make a video of a child who comes in extremely anxious and agitated, and incapable of focusing on anything. And within 10 minutes, when we've shared some food and they sit down and use art, what an extraordinary change there is about the whole level of anxiety. I'm not saying we're curing them, but for that particular couple of hours, the anxiety level has decreased. But there has been research on that. And I think it would be a really interesting thing to, next time you organize a conference, to talk about that.
Brilliant, thank you. Liz.
I was just going to say that I know that there is research out there. I did hear a lecture from a neuroscientist talking about the impact of the art and design, as well as the other arts, can have on children in terms of preparing them for learning, because of the brain chemistry and the chemicals that taking part in the arts can have, and actually how in a school it would be good to perhaps have these things happening in the morning, because it really sort of prepares the brain and gets it into the perfect state for learning when the chemicals are released. So it might be quite interesting to hear from a neuroscientist about how that actually works and the research that they've done. But there's certainly some research out there that suggests the value and power of the arts to prepare your brain for learning.
Thank you, Liz. That's really interesting. Sam?
I was just going to say, so Daisy Fancourt at UCL has done quite a lot looking at arts and mental health and probably, you know, the sort of most detailed stuff I'm aware of. Yeah. But I think what we don't quite know, because I think what we don't quite know is actually exactly what are we saying is the most effective way to calm people down. Is it to sit down with a pencil and draw, and these are the instructions? It's that kind of level of detail that I think is what potentially we need in schools. Because if you're saying to your senior leadership team, we should start tutor group every day with 5 people, 5 minutes doing this because it makes you present, and therefore you are far more likely to do, which I completely believe to be true, but I don't have the evidence to then share with colleagues to say, this is the intervention, this has been tested and it's better than anything else. And I suppose it's that level of detail I think we need potentially in the current landscape, but then maybe we could change the landscape so we don't need that level.
I like that. I like that thinking. Let's change the landscape.
Yeah.
Okay, let us move on to the next question. So at this point, we were kind of moving more specifically into art as a discipline, and thinking about the more kind of the focus on the attributes of making art in the classroom, and the differences between that and doing it at home, because the children talked a lot about the differences, but some of them talked about their experiences at home and just talked about their experiences at home, and some mentioned their experiences in relation to the classroom as well. So we picked up on how I think that's really interesting, this kind of difference between how a child experiences art in different spaces. And the quote we have here is, actually, sometimes when I do my art, I like to put some scribbles on, and then in a different color, then I pour a bit of water on it, then it goes all around the paper, and then my brother, he does his favorite color, and then he puts another layer on top when it's dried, and then he pours on some water, and then it's like covered the whole paper. We thought this was wonderful description of a child really playing with materials and playing collaboratively. So we're not being an individual exercise, but something that is very shared. So the question I'd like to open up to the panel, and I can see Liz has already got a hand up, is, are children more likely to take risks with their artwork at home than they are in the classroom? Okay, Liz, over to you.
My experience of teaching is very much that children view art done at home as something totally different and separate from anything that they do in the classroom. And never the twain shall meet unless you happen to perhaps draw them into conversation about it. I think, yeah, they're free to do what they want at home. There's no preconception, and there's no sort of teacher dictating what they should do it or how they should do it. Although they might be encouraged to experience different materials and media at school, and actually there aren't any rules. You can do it how you want to do it. And I think that is so important to recognise that a lot of artwork is actually going on outside of school that teachers don't ever know about. And it can be far more exciting and meaningful because it's actually come from the child themselves, what they want to do, what they enjoy doing. And we've had some, my experience of teaching was we had some really quite exciting work happening once we were able to tap into what children were doing at home and bring that into the classroom, but not impose our view of what they should be doing, but letting them run with what they wanted to do, and then building other aspects to get them through to a GCSE that complemented their work, not squashed it. So yeah, I think that they are more likely to take risks outside of school, and try and conform a little bit more because that's what's expected of them in school.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. And I wonder what part assessment plays there as well in shaping those responses. a big part to play. Vicky.
I want to introduce another space where I think children take risks, and you will not be surprised to hear me say that it's digital. But we support a youth organisation called VoiceBox, and there's a whole thread on there around from and by young artists. And what we see in that thread is young artists around the world supporting each other, doing an extraordinary variety of things from journaling to massive papier-mâché community, really slightly, this is my own prejudice shining through, slightly oddly, I was going to say about papier-mâché. I'm sure it's a very satisfying way to create your art. But what we see in digital spaces is that art finds each other. Young artists find each other. And where at home, then mum and dad might say to them, could you please not make that mess? And, no, don't scribble on the wall. And can you put your colouring pens down because I'm about to serve dinner and all those things. And at school, they might feel that they're going to be tested or assessed or, judged. In online communities, we see young artists absolutely finding each other and flourishing. And I think that's one of the places that they're taking risks. And it's a really lovely, lovely thing to see.
Lovely, thank you, Vicky. We've had a comment in the questions. Somebody agrees with Liz. The problem is in the label art as a school subject. If it was actually seen as an expression of being human, then many of today's concerns would disappear. Is there a case, therefore, for dropping the word art in the school curriculum? How interesting. Now that's quite provocative. Yuli.
I'm not sure if I can answer this question, but I think risk is such an important thing. And I think that is something that, I think we all have to encourage our children to do. I'm just going to talk a little bit about lockdown. We found out that some of the children we were working with didn't even have a pencil or a piece of paper. So to take risks at home, unfortunately, they were taking wrong risks, but I'm not sure if they were taking bigger risks in art. And I just want to bring that up, that not every child has access to paper, pencil, let alone wonderful acrylic paint or felt tips, but also the space at home or the encouragement from home. So I think we, working in schools or in organizations where we work with children, I think it's really important that we encourage risk-taking and making mistakes, or, taking a risk to make a mistake, because I think that is the way to actually help the children move forward in how they are in their emotions, but also in their education. So I think we have to encourage risk-taking wherever we are with young people.
Lovely, thank you. Sam.
I always think risk-taking is quite an interesting concept, because you're probably all aware of funders who want risk-taking and edgy projects, and then you go, and what percentage of projects will you expect to fail? And they can't answer that. Because I wonder, actually, we say we like risk-taking, but actually, if you expect things to, like how much risk do you accept in your life? And do you say, well, I'm going to do this and it's going to fail? So I think that's an interesting provocation that I sometimes think about me and the things I'm doing and the risk, because risk-taking is incredibly beneficial for finding out new things, the R&D stuff. The point I was just going to make around the sort of flourishing of art online, which isn't a bit tangential to this, but when the pandemic started, I was really struck by a comment from Baroness Bull, Deborah Bull, who runs the it's the Culture Centre at King's College. I'm probably got the name wrong. Please correct me with the correct one. But she was actually saying, I think we need to focus on supporting artists because art will survive. Art, being human, part of being human is creating art, and it just flourishes. But actually, we need to focus on people at the moment because they're the things that need support. And I was really struck by that as an idea that art will survive.
Mm. That's is that because it's kind of an innate human expression that we have always made, we will always make, that it will always exist in some format?
I mean, I expected Nina was still in here, she would be talking about our history, that, you know, just actually, because I do think that actually when you think about what makes someone human, I think the creation of art is that, you know, it is it's one of the things about being human, is that we create and we make art.
Yeah.
And so actually it does, you can discuss about our education system and what it is that stops people feeling and believing that they're artists. But actually I do think to be human is to be an artist.
Yeah, that's lovely. And in that sense, if to be human is to be an artist, to be human is also to take risks and to fail. And yeah, I really like what you were saying there about you know, if you want people to take risks, you have to accommodate for the fact that it's not going to go right all the time, because that's the inherent nature of what you're doing. And I, you know, to what extent are our schools risk averse places? That's maybe another conversation. We've had a couple of comments. Penny says, well said, Sam. She's Lucy said, regarding those at home without materials but with creative potential, there is the fabulous Make Bank, which supports children. I am aware of the Make Bank. So it's a charity who will send materials to children who do not have access to them. So thank you very much, Lucy. That was a great reminder. Okay, let's move on to our next question. We've got about 20 minutes left and we've got 2 questions, so we'll see how we get on with finishing both of them. This one was about the importance of a knowledgeable teacher to challenge preconceptions and misconceptions, the children's misconceptions. So our child's quote was, at school you can learn a lot, and that's what maybe you can copy at home. So you can use some of the things you've learned in the classroom and you can add them together. So embellishing or taking from something that they've experienced at school and running with it at home, doing something different with it at home. How important do you think it is that to have subject specialists teaching children at each stage of school? And this kind of, we've had another question in the chat from a bit earlier, which was a question from Ishara, who asked, how do you assess art in primary school? And I think that there is a synergy there between that question and this one about the need for subject specialists at every stage of a child's education. So let's go to Liz first and then we'll go to Sam.
Right, yeah, well, I've been in a lot of schools in my career and I've seen an awful lot of different approaches to art and design. And it's really obvious whenever you go into a primary school where they've got a specialist art teacher there. I can remember going to one school in Nottingham, and they had a specialist art teacher who just taught art right across the school. And as you walked in, there was artwork everywhere. And some of the year 6 work looked a little bit like GCSE work. It was so advanced compared to what you tend to see in a lot of schools where there isn't a specialist there, because teaching had actually focused on developing the art skills. And that really, really, really showed in the children's outcomes. They really had a highly developed sense of drawing and an ability to handle media and materials and use the formal elements to create interesting and exciting pieces of artwork of their own. And it just makes a huge, huge difference. There can be an awful lot of art going on in a school, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's an awful lot of art teaching going on. And there's a big difference between just letting children do it, and that's fine to experience playing with materials and combining materials and using imagination, but that needs to be directed as well. And I think teachers who are art specialists, understand about the combination of the formal elements and can introduce children to a wide range of experiences and art and craft and design works that are going to really impact on what children then go on to be able to do. So I do think it is really important to have a subject specialist. I'm very aware that there are a lot of schools where teachers may have no experience or very little experience between them. You have subject leaders in primary schools who perhaps have no background in the subject at all. And you know, they do the best job that they can, trying to draw on teaching assistants, parents, governors coming in to support an art curriculum. But I think there is a wealth difference between having a subject specialist throughout your art and design education than actually just working with teachers who do the best that they can.
Thank you, Liz. You raised a number of really important points, especially about teachers who work in settings where they are asked to deliver a subject that they have very little experience and subject knowledge. That's an incredibly difficult position to be put in, and can create a lot of anxiety and stress for the teachers, which is not a particularly fun place to be. Sam.
I agree with everything Liz just said, and actually I feel like there's a lot of evidence that backs that up around the importance of subject specialists. So I'm sure you've all seen those graphs about the impact of high quality teaching for children who are experiencing disadvantage is particularly important. You know, there's those graphs. I'm trying to make it so that it looks right with the mirror image for you. But basically, so children who are experiencing disadvantage, if they're taught by a teacher who isn't particularly experienced, often they're out, you know, they don't really make any progress. Whereas, so you want, because everyone's knowing, so that's data which we knew already about teaching. But if you look into some other things, like Ofsted published a report where they were looking at preparing for deep dives, and they were reporting on how the deep dives had worked in schools. And when you actually read into the detail of it, what it was showing is that they said, when we did deep dives in subjects other than maths and English at primary level, we found actually the quality of provision wasn't as good. So it was about 40 different schools. And so they were actually saying that the quality of the curriculum in art, for example, wasn't as good at primary school, but maths and English was very good. And they went, maybe this is because we have been training primary teachers to do maths and English, but not to the other subjects so much. So I think there's a real bank of evidence there about that. And then the converse was very true at secondary level. So at secondary level, art teachers tend to be the most qualified of teachers. They're far more likely to have a degree in their subject than actually other teachers do when you look into the numbers. So English, it's about 50%, and art teachers, I think, might be up in 70 to 80% of art teachers have a degree in the thing they're teaching. And actually the quality of teaching by specialist art teachers with the really high level of qualification was much higher at secondary level than in other subjects. So Ofsted were finding deep dives into art at secondary level, the quality was higher than in other subjects. And so I think, that just proves that point about specialist teachers there and the importance of that. And then there's a whole load of other stuff, I think, around curriculum planning and specialist teachers. And so actually at secondary level, one of the things that we talk about at Cultural Learning Alliance is kind of the unintended consequences of accountability systems. And actually, if you are cutting down the number of art teachers you have in a school because you feel like as a school you can't offer as much art because you need to fit in more EBacc subjects, and therefore you don't have the specialist teachers programming the Key Stage 3, the quality of experience for children isn't good, and then potentially less likely to pick to do GCSE art because they haven't had an enjoyable experience at Key Stage 3 because they're not being taught by a specialist teacher. So not only are the outcomes potentially not as good without a specialist teacher, children don't enjoy it in the same way and therefore don't want to choose it and to progress in the subject. So I think in terms of how important is it to have subject specialists teaching children every stage of school, I actually think teaching is the most important component. I really feel like that if you ask me where should we invest, and you can only do it in one thing, it's teaching every single time as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Absolutely, you've made an exemplary case there, Sam. Fantastic, thank you. And I'm really fascinated by the Ofsted deep dive data. That's really interesting.
I wrote a blog on it. I'll find it and I'll pop it in the chat to you, and then maybe you can share it with others.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, I think it speaks volumes about the subsequent government agendas that we've been dealing with since the 1990s, and this kind of, focus on literacy and numeracy, and at the expense of everything else. We have a question here from Peter. Yes, Peter, I will forward on the Ofsted report that Sam has mentioned, so the link that Sam's going to get. So I will do that for you. Okay, wonderful, lovely. So subject specialists and the quality of teaching is absolutely crucial in terms, not just in terms of the transmission, the development of different knowledge and learning, but also in terms of the child's enjoyment of the subject. They're not going to, you're absolutely right, they're not going to want to study the subject that they don't enjoy. That's fantastic. Sam has just popped that in the chat, and I will make sure that that is made available to everybody who's here. Okay. Yes, Liz.
I just wanted to follow that with saying it's not just about perhaps not making it enjoyable, it's also having the subject knowledge to make sure that what you're teaching is accurate. I saw a lesson where the teacher had very good intentions teaching children how to make a coil pot, but missed out the fact that you need to score and when you add your slip to join two pieces together. So the children were busy making their pots, but you knew that as soon as they dried out, they were just going to fall apart. So those children will probably go away from that experience, having maybe enjoyed it at the time, but it didn't work. So actually, I don't really want to do that again because that didn't work. It puts them off. So it's so important to make sure that teachers really know their subjects so that they are enabling children to have a high quality experience and feel successful with their outcomes.
Absolutely, Liz. I think that's where the kind of, addressing misconceptions. You can only address a misconception if you understand that it's a misconception, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Vicky.
Just a super quick point, really, which is I forgive me, I find these questions, this particular question, one of those really frustrating questions. I remember many, many years ago, I nearly lost my cool going to an event with Naomi Einstad, who was one of the people that set up Sure Start, and she gave a big speech at the beginning that said, "We now know that what parents do matters." And I was like, I can't believe you just said that, because parents have known that for the last millennium. Of course, what parents do matters. And I always feel the same way about this question, because across every subject, it's not just art. If you look at the evidence around PSHE, if you look at the evidence around history, if you look at every subject matter, you are going to have a better experience and better learning outcomes if you have a specialist teacher. And so this, I don't think this is about art. I think this is about teaching generally, and there's a community of people out there who all feel the same way. Undervaluing subject specialism is a huge, huge mistake.
Thank you. That's a fantastic way to wrap that section of the discussion up. You're absolutely right. I think we should talk to the DFE about this. Not like we haven't already, but you know the frustration. Okay, let's go to our final question, which is kind of a sort of bringing it wholesale round again. We're talking about the value and the purpose of art in the curriculum. And we have this wonderful quote, I think everything is art, actually. I think you're art, because everything is made of something else. So what purpose does school art play? And I also want to kind of open up, there was a question that I received right at the beginning of the session, which was, how can we stop and reverse the erosion of the arts and this perception that they are not proper subjects? And I think that fits in very nicely here to this question. So what purpose does school art play? Who would like to go first? Sam.
I feel like, because I don't actually work in a school, so this is the view from the outside, so very happy for Liz and others to jump in on this. But from the view from the Cultural Learning Alliance, the purpose of school art for us is about social justice and equity and children having access, because not every child, as we've just said, gets to experience a full range of art at home. And actually, so actually 99% of children attend school. So school is a place where we can ensure that children are experiencing art and all the boosts to their outcomes that they're going to get from that. And so actually ensuring that school art is persistent and consistent throughout their school career is so incredibly important. But I think the purpose of school art is to ensure every child experiences it and feels that they are an artist.
That's lovely. Thank you, Sam. I think everybody should be able to have the experience of feeling like an artist, to be an artist, to perform that position of being an artist. You're absolutely right. Liz.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that point of view. I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it? Nobody questions why we teach English. Nobody questions the purpose of having English in the curriculum, because that's a form of communication that we all need and use. But we often talk about, well, why have art? Because I don't want to be an artist, so why do I have to study it? Well, you're not probably studying English because you want to be an author. Not that many people study English because they definitely want to be an author, but we study it because it's really important for communication. We have to be able to use it in different formats. But it's the same with art. We need to be visually literate. We've discussed all of these answers now. It's just sort of summing up. But we've talked about the cultural capital and the contribution that the subject plays to that. It's just as important for spiritual, moral, social and cultural development of children. It's important to be seen as an artist. It's important to experience the world through art and learn about the world through art. We shouldn't have to be justifying our existence in the curriculum. It should be central. And I agree with Uli's point. We can teach everything through art. Art touches on every other subject and is really important across all subjects. So, yes, it plays a really important central role in children's education, and it needs to be there, and it needs to be valued by teachers, by the department, by the government, by the wider population. It touches absolutely everything we do.
Thank you. Very rousing summary, Liz. That's lovely. Thank you. Yuli.
I just want to say it's absolutely vital. It's human right. I think we can do, sorry, repeating myself and Liz is, we can teach every single subject through art. And I just finish off with Bob and Roberta Smith's quote, all schools should be art schools. And I think, I don't think I could possibly say it better than he does. So I think, I think we've really got to fight to bring art back in, but not just as a subject. It's got to be throughout the timetable.
Thank you. And that kind of links on to, we've had a question in the chat from Aisha, who was the expert who facilitated the workshop with the children. And she asks, do the panel think that children and teachers would benefit from collaborating with art and across other subjects? And I think that kind of plays very nicely into what you've just said there, Yuli. And I've had a comment from Karen, who says, if someone has focused on a subject themselves in their own life, then not just their skills, but their enthusiasm will be true and will engage others. Enthusiasm and truly believing in what you are teaching is essential. That's lovely. Thank you, Karen. That's actually from somebody that I trained to be a teacher many years ago. That's lovely. Thank you, Karen. It's really nice to know that you're here. We have 5 minutes until we finish the event, and I can't believe that we've got through all of the questions with 5 minutes to spare. And at this point, I, as well as saying my profuse thanks to the panel for everything that you've contributed, and to the Year 2 children, and to Claudia, the classroom teacher, and to Aisha, who facilitated the workshop. What an absolutely wonderful event, and such a privilege for me to chair. I would like to hand over as a final kind of ending piece to Michelle Gregson from NSEAD, who's going to say a couple of final words.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks everybody. It's been very validating of my statement at the top of this session, that we believe art matters. Quite a relief, I've got to say, that the conversation didn't decide that it doesn't. But it's been such a wide-ranging discussion, has touched on so many areas. I'm very glad that there's a challenge to Ofsted in there and the DFE, because that's certainly our job at NCAD to carry that forwards, and trust us, we will. But really importantly, that this whole discussion was led by the children, working with Aisha, the children down at Oxford High. So they've very much been here, and it has been their discussion that we've been responding to. So thanks to all the panelists for giving such thoughtful and incisive comments, and indeed everybody participating who's asked questions and commented. So yeah, art does matter. It matters to children. The children have told us that in the things that they've had to say. It's just essential for a thriving civic society, and we've seen all the ways in which art touches upon that. But what I take away very strongly from the discussion is the importance of education in many places and many shapes and forms, but very particularly specialist teaching. It's important. It's the bedrock of really high quality art, craft and design education. So yes, it matters. Lots of work to do. I think I'll finish actually with Huli's words that she began with, that art is a human right, quite simply. And, you know, it's our responsibility of all of us to fight for it. And we will, won't we? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Michelle. We've had a message from Aisha saying thanks so much to the panel, a really stimulating, inspiring conversation, and just saying how much she enjoyed working with the children. And I'm so pleased, Michelle, that you said that the children's voices came through so strongly, because that was our core aim. We really wanted the children to be central in this, but to give them a platform, but in an ethical way, so that they weren't intimidated or put on the spot. Okay, folks, thank you all very much for joining us, and we will, once the recording is available, we will be in touch with everybody who's registered for this event, and we will tell you how you can access that recording. And I've had a couple of private messages for various people on the panel, and I just acknowledging that I've got those, and I will contact the panel members on your behalf. Okay, thank you all very much for spending nearly 2 hours of your evening on a Wednesday. Thank you.